Isn't it nice to have a little
That
break?
that was great.
Thanks.
Having a little break.
Yeah, no, it really makes a big difference. Otherwise, you're just run right into it, right?
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me at all? My mic is on.
Don't know why.
Fola, can you hear me?
I can't.
Very, very, very faint, and I've got my volume up high.
You can hear me okay, Fola?
Yeah.
I just figured out why. It was my plugs.
Okay.
Operator issue. Thank you.
Trish, Steve, did you get a bite to eat there?
I gotta get.
So welcome to those joining the meeting. We will start shortly after 1 o'clock. So Ms. Foster, I'm just going to amend for clarification purposes in the addendum item. Should I be adding anything?
Yeah, you're going to add the COVID policy. We moved it from the past agenda to this one.
Okay, that's good.
So then you'll have the 3 items to read. You'll have your letter that was posted this morning and the COVID-19 letter to the ministers and premier.
Okay. Thank you again to everybody who's joining us for our public meeting. Just a few housekeeping items. Please turn your mics on mute throughout the entire meeting unless you're asked to speak. Right, it's 1 o'clock. Just waiting for the mayor. I don't believe I see that he's logged on. Has anyone heard from him?
I spoke with his assistant and she is aware that he needs to be on for 1, so she's probably working on that.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Like, is this, it says London Police Services Board.
If we could just have all users mute their microphones, please, unless you're called on to speak.
Yeah, so this should be the right thing. Okay.
We need it here.
I have no idea how you do it.
Which is our box.
Over here.
Okay, so click on that.
That? You know what you do? There's nothing on there. Like I won't be in here, right? So does that matter?
Hi, CTV.
So CTV London, you're not on mute. If you could please mute, we can't begin our meeting until we've got everybody muted.
So how do I do that?
Okay, we're just in the process of figuring that out. Give us 1 second.
And Ms. Foster, perhaps you can pass on the host controls to me. Thank you. We're just waiting on the mayor here, and then we'll get started. A reminder.
Mayor's on, Javid.
Okay. Don't have video from him. All right. So thank you everyone for signing in. Please just a reminder to keep your mic muted if you're not speaking. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'll call the meeting to order at 1:03 p.m. I'd like to thank all of you for engaging and participating in today's meeting. Our meeting is being recorded and this public meeting will be posted on the YouTube channel for the service as soon as possible, likely tomorrow. We are going to do our best to monitor who is entering and exiting the meeting as much as possible. I'd like to start off and thank our community for the deep level of engagement in which people have contacted us. In the context of the pandemic, we've been dealing with multiple moving issues. The board has appreciated all the comments shared with us on a variety of issues over the course of the last few weeks. We also appreciate the work of our frontline service members, sworn and civilian. In particular, the pandemic has created challenging circumstances, as we know, and therefore we really appreciate the continued diligence and compassion from those working in LPS. I also want to thank our community for continuing to abide by public health guidelines related to the pandemic. It's especially important as things open up that we continue to be responsible, thoughtful, and careful with one another. There are still many members of our community that are vulnerable. And I would also ask that we do our best to maintain safe physical distances and consider wearing masks. Masks are extremely important in order to help prevent the spread of the infection of the virus. In particular, our board has been engaged in discussions related to the protests that have occurred in our community. We will be discussing that item in further detail during today's meeting. I'd like to also take an opportunity at this moment to offer two congratulations. The first congratulations is to our Vice Chair Susan Toth, on her Award of Excellence in the promotion of women's equality by the Ontario Bar Association Women's Lawyer Forum. So virtual applause for Vice Chair Toth. We're very proud of your accomplishment and really just it's a testament to your leadership in our community and the fact that you're a role model for so many. Congratulations. I'd like to also offer an unscripted congratulations to Chief Williams on the graduation from his master's program. So congratulations to the Chief on that incredible accomplishment. Cheers to you. Moving forward, we're going to ask for any matters, if there's any disclosures of interest from board members. None noted. We're going to move forward to the introduction of addendum and new business items. There's three items to add to our agenda. There's a letter from myself as chair, a letter from the LPSB to ministers and premier regarding COVID status sharing policy, and the actual COVID status sharing policy that's been put forward by the board. Can I get a motion to receive and add these items? Moved by Mr. Lang, seconded by Deputy Mayor. All in favor? Mayor, I did not get a visual in favor there from you. So if you could either give me a verbal or a visual to confirm. Okay, just want to make sure that the mayor's looped in and connected to the meeting. Yes, thank you. Moving forward, the minutes of the May 21st public LPSB meeting. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes as presented? Moved by Mr. Lang, seconded by Deputy Mayor. All in favor? Thank you. Item 5, revenue offsetting personnel cost report. Deputy Chief Betts.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to the board. This is a semi-annual report that comes to the board just to provide an update with regard to the positions at the LPS that are funded by other sources. And in this case, in Appendix A, those are primary and key deliverables that we give here to the city. The Community Safety and Policing grant pays for our foot patrol downtown. Of course, we have a grant for our court security and prisoner transportation and some funding from the province with regard to that. And of course, cybercrime investigations. Appendix B are some of the other programs that we are involved with that help us to combat crime in our communities, but also to offer instructional expertise at the Ontario Police College as part of our ongoing commitment to that program for decades now. So this report comes to you with the recommendation that you receive it for your information.
Any questions for Deputy Chief Betts from board members? If there are none, can I get a motion to receive the report for informational purposes? Made by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by the Mayor. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Item 6, this is the London Police Service Annual Report and 2019 Business Plan Update. Chief Betts.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to the board, it's my pleasure to bring to the board and ultimately through the board to the city the annual report from the London Police Service. It was prepared with a tremendous amount of effort, especially during these particular difficult times, by our Corporate Services Division and our corporate communications. I'd like to just highlight a couple of things within the report. I think you'll find that it's very thorough and provides a tremendous amount of information to the community. First thing I'd like to highlight is page 7, and just to acknowledge that the inclusion of the content on page 7 is all about the London Police Service's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This follows directly, as you'll see on the adjacent page, to our mission, vision, and values. This is by intent because it is important to the London Police Service, and we wanted to make sure that it features very prominently. You'll recall that we introduced our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan last year with an aggressive 21-point plan to help us to achieve some additional goals in that regard. Next, I'd like to draw your attention to page 10. Page 10 outlines some of the joint force operations that the London Police Service members have been engaged with over the past year. Those are operations in which we partner with other agencies across the province, sometimes nationally, to combat organized crime. This is work that takes place behind the scenes that isn't ordinarily in the public eye. This is the stuff that keeps our community safe and that people don't realize they're being kept safe. And really that is a prime expectation of a good and efficient police service. So I'd just like to draw your attention to that page. These are the types of things that are combating organized crime that prey on our vulnerable people. They feed on addictions, they feed on mental health issues, and through the tremendous work that's being done here, you'll see an outline of some of the great work that's been undertaken in that area. Another highlight I'd like to draw your attention to is the section called Problem-Oriented Policing on page 15. This is really important as well because this is the proactive policing. These are the things where the community and our own research has identified concerns, public safety concerns within the city, and we are able to take and undertake proactive initiatives to combat those issues. You'll see that there are 4 key components of that. Obviously, the problem identification, and as I said, that can be either through our own analysis and or through community feedback. We do a full and thorough analysis of the particular problems or issues at hand. A response, including initiatives and proposals, are developed, and then, as is always the case, there's proper monitoring and evaluations of the initiatives to ensure that they are achieving the goals that we set forward. And finally, I'd like to draw your attention to pages 19 to 23. And the reason I do so here is because this features all the work in the community that the London Police Service is engaged with. As you know, community well-being and community safety are 2 of the 3 pillars of our business plan. And this highlights some of the activities that we are engaged with, sometimes very visually. So you can see how our officers, how our civilians, how all our members are engaged in the community, not just as a enforcement side of policing, but this is what we bring to the prevention and community services delivery. This is what makes London Police the human side. This is the human side of the London Police Service, where we truly do interact with the community. It's more than enforcement. This is building relationships and long-lasting trust and confidence in the police service. So I really think that the work that that has been categorized and is displayed for you here is tremendously important, and it should be recognized. And I wanted to ensure that I could point that out and bring it to your attention. The remainder of the report, equally as important. It gives you some of the statistics related to the police service, not just our demographics, but also our progress with regard to the annual business plan year 1 and how we are progressing through the implementation of the goals and objectives of the business plan. And as you'll see, that we are proceeding. So this is brought to you in compliance with the adequacy standard requirements, City of London protocol, and the board's policy 060. My recommendations are that the board receive this report for their information, and that it be forwarded to the city in accordance with the protocol with the city. Subject to any questions? That's my report.
Thank you kindly, Deputy Chief Betts. We'll open it up for any comments or questions from board members. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I know that this is a report that covers a lot of different topics, and so I don't want to turn it into a discussion of every one of those things, but I wonder if administration wants to comment at all about the sort of 10-year trend in the crime statistics, and if there's anything there that is particularly of interest in terms of 2019.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So the 2019 statistics are still being actually completed. The upload and extraction of StatsCan actually is going to take place this month. So they're still in the verification piece. What I would speak to in terms of the trend is, as you would have seen during the course of our budget presentation, our crime rate per 100,000 has seen a little bit of an uptake. Although we are below the national average and the provincial average in terms of violent crimes against people, our property crime has increased, which speaks to the commitment that the London Police Service has towards crime prevention programs that are specific to those, what I would call quality of life types of crimes. Those are the types of crimes that we are tackling with the problem-oriented policing initiatives. Are there other aspects that you would like me to speak to specifically?
I think that's helpful. I just, having looked at the numbers that are on page 26, I think, as you point out, these are not from the StatsCan publications yet, but they're sort of from our internal data. It seems like the trend is that there's more property crime occurring, and that the clearance rate is a little bit lower for that, and that we're doing very well in terms of the clearance rate on violent crimes. I think it's fair to characterize it that way, and that is holding relatively steady, maybe a bit of an increase over time. So, I think it's helpful for people to understand sort of the nature of what kind of criminal activity is happening, and overall, I think you can also observe that there's a decrease in the number of people being charged, and I think that's helpful to draw the attention of the public to those things when we have the report come forward. So I appreciate the answer from Deputy Betts.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other comments or questions from board members? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Earlier in the report, and this is what I said, I don't want to turn it into a discussion of all the different areas because we do have separate reports on these things, and I know we'll deal with them at the appropriate time, but there is a breakdown of the overall complement, ranks, and on the sworn and civilian side, and it indicates sort of what is going on in terms of men and women, which I think is helpful. And I know we have a diversity plan that we're tracking targets beyond men and women, and I wonder if administration have any comments about how that is going, without recreating the entire sort of diversity plan update that we would normally receive.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, to the Deputy Mayor. So thank you. Yes, you have certainly pointed that out. And in fact, you are quite right. That is part of our 21-point plan with regard to our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. In fact, what I would like to also point out with regard to that is the initiative here that the Chief has championed. All hiring panels and selection panels for internal movement within this organization are to be reflective of the diverse nature of our organization. So that's in terms of gender, but also in terms of ethnic background. So that's a major shift in the organization. The Chief has championed that move to ensure that we're applying different perspectives and trying to be all-inclusive when considering the applicants. I don't have an update for you at this time. That was planned for our September board meeting with regard to the halfway status on the diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. But I can tell you there have been a number of efforts underway to reach out to some of our communities where we may be a little more underrepresented in terms of applicants to the organization, but also members of the organization, including a special session just last night to help to introduce members who are perhaps underrepresented in our organization, bring them into a safe environment where they felt that they participate in the physical testing, get an opportunity to speak one-on-one with people within the organization, also from diverse backgrounds, to help to profile the London Police Service and how they might, in fact, be a very good fit and join this organization to serve their community.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I think this will be my last question. Leave some time for other folks. There is a chart in there on page 29 that talks about what's happening with call volumes, but also the average time spent on dispatch call. I wonder if administration wants to talk about that, what's been changing sort of over the 10-year period with more and more time required for calls for service.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to the Deputy Mayor and to the board. So you're quite right. The average time spent on calls for service has been increasing, and that really speaks to the increasing complexity and nature of the investigations that's required. The what's really driving that particular statistic is the amount of time that's being spent on mental health calls and domestic violence calls. These are significantly complex investigations, even at the mental health level, which often doesn't involve criminality, but can do so. And this requirements, once we have engaged with somebody who's in a crisis and requires transport to a hospital, part of that is being captured as the wait time in the hospital to ensure that they get to see somebody that they are required to see under the legislation, Section 17 of the Mental Health Act. So that's what's driving those numbers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Betts. Deputy Mayor, any other comments or questions from board members? If not, I'll ask for a motion that we receive for informational purposes the LPS 2019 annual report and business plan update, and also that the board will forward a copy of the annual report and business plan update to all members of municipal council. Made by the mayor, seconded by the deputy mayor. All in favor? All right, motion carried. Thank you. We're going to move on to our next item on the agenda. This refers to the matter of the towing contract between our board. As the public is aware, and was discussed at our last public meeting, there was a proposal and a recommendation made by London Police Service Administration to extend the existing contract that we have with Ross Towing. We had a decision at the last meeting to seek further legal advice regarding particulars of the contract. The board has had a chance to review this information and deliberate. We want to share a message with the public, and I also will be opening this up to other board members to share their thoughts on the matter. We want to thank all of the feedback and information that has been provided to us by the towing industry. This information has been very important to us, and we have taken a lot of the concerns that have been brought forward by all the different towing operators in our community very much to heart. It is our intention as a board to take this feedback to the next RFP process. However, in that case, and to do this properly, we will need time. This time is especially important from our perspective as it pertains to the city and its role in regulation. It's also important that we have time to ensure we have a fair RFP process that incorporates the very important feedback we've received from multiple tow operators in our community. We also think that there's time we need for the industry to work towards the establishment of a towing association, which is a welcome and very much well-received step from our perspective. Therefore, the board will be seeking an extension of 1 year of our existing contract pursuant to terms of the contract with Ross Towing. But we will also simultaneously immediately start to review our existing RFP and our needs, as we as a board are committed to competition and fairness while also meeting our obligations when impounding vehicles. We will continue to welcome any input and feedback from all members of our community as we engage in this process. With that, I'll pause and ask if there's other members of the board that would like to share their comments and thoughts on the towing topic. Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, Chair, and through you. It'll come, I'm sure, as no surprise to anyone who was at the last public meeting that I did not support the motion as is. I cannot support an extension of a contract that includes the clause, which is 22.3, which, if you weren't aware or if you don't recall, it's the clause which requires London police officers to make a recommendation to a specific towing provider in situations that don't involve impounding, so accidents, vehicles that aren't working. I'm just not comfortable with the lack of impartiality, this view that London Police Services is seen to prefer one company over another. It also lacks in proper competition. I understand and support this need to go through the RFP process as stated by the chair, and I'm supportive of those comments. I regret the time that is going to allow for that towing association to really become firmly established, I think will be important, and particularly important is for the city to address this issue. But in my view, that clause 22.3's lifespan should have ended today and not continued for another year. It's clear that police are not supposed to be in the business of regulating towing or preferring one business over another. For the purposes of impounding, we obviously have really important legal obligations. So in that context, having specific providers with specific resources makes sense. And we will go through that process in next year through the RFP. But I really want to stress that the city needs to step up and regulate the industry to deal with any concerns about safety. And it's my view that the industry seems supportive of that. Most of them take great pride in the work that they're doing. And I just have to say, it's a little stunning to me that the food truck industry in London is more regulated than towing. In the same way that a lot of people have criticized the towing community for not getting an association together, I would say that the city also had ample time to move towards regulating this industry to deal with safety concerns and price gouging concerns. So I believe there will be a motion, and I won't discuss it too much now, to direct, or at least, sorry, I shouldn't say direct, to ask the city to move forward with these regulations and encourage that process to happen in a timely manner. But I can't support the motion to extend the contract in its current form.
Mayor? Mayor Holder, just ensure that you unmute your mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And like the Vice Chair, I had some challenges around the issue of competition and the like as it related to the towing industry. Where I have some great optimism is that I see a number of initiatives starting to take place amongst members of the towing industry here in our city. I'll echo the comments of the Vice Chair. These are hardworking people that are simply trying to take care of their families. And I get that. I think we're at a point between what happens with work that will be done at the city level, work that will be done within the towing industry itself, in terms of its own, I'll say, self-governance, for lack of a more precise term right now, and also what we do as a police services board. I think these things, there will be a confluence of these issues. And I'm optimistic that come beyond this short-term extension, that I think that the towing industry will be well served beyond this. I think the public will be continue to be served, but again, I would even say better served as a result of the initiatives that I've seen from the towing industry. And I think those need to be firmed up, as do I think some rules and regs through the city. And in the longer term, in the medium term, I'm looking forward to having a really solid, highly regarded towing industry within our city.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. Any other comments? Okay. Thank you all. So we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, item number 8, which is a follow-up to the Black Lives Matter protest that took place. I have tabled a letter that I have written to my fellow board members that is available now. Just a few thoughts I'd like to start off with. Over the course of the past few weeks, I've been listening and reading, I've been speaking and consulting with those who have reached out to the board. And I thank all of you, every one of you that has reached out and tried to engage with us. I've also spoken to each and every member of our board, as well as members of our London Police Services and administration. In addition, I've spoken with members of London's Black community who've shared their concerns and hopes for a better future for themselves and for their children. I believe we are witnessing a historic moment. We have a choice to make as a police services board. We can and should take decisive action on the issue of anti-Black racism. While the board should recognize our jurisdiction and defer operational matters where appropriate to our chief, there are some clear actions we can take that are in our purview and other matters where we can make our advice explicit. In some areas, we must work in direct partnership with other boards and levels of government to address anti-Black racism at all levels of our community. Our frontline London Police Services members, sworn and civilian, have seen increasing demands and pressures without a commensurate increase in resources. Their mental health and their well-being is also of vital importance. We must also appreciate the high degree of professionalism, compassion, and commitment to service that is evident within the members. With that, I'm going to pass the chair over to the vice chair as I make a few suggestions.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take over and please go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like the board to consider the document that I've put forward and a few general principles that may guide any of our decisions on this matter. Wherever possible, we should be mindful of the requests from the Black community regarding their concerns about safety and police presence in their community. Wherever possible, we should support improved interactions, partnerships, and trust between London Police and vulnerable members of our community. Wherever possible, we should appreciate that incremental reforms are not substantial enough to achieve the transformational change that is necessary to address the scourge of systemic racism in all facets of our community, including but not limited to policing, healthcare, community, social services, and other sectors. And wherever possible, we should be guided by actions that have a meaningful and sustainable positive impact. I've outlined my discrete suggestions as 12 recommendations in the document table today in 6 specific areas, and I humbly put this forward for your discussion and consideration. Thank you.
Chair, would you like to take the chair back or would you like me to facilitate the?
I'm content to take it back at this point now that I've made my personal recommendations that are from me and not on behalf of the board. Thank you. All right, so we'll open it up for discussion. Perhaps we can see who'd like to start things off. Chief Williams, perhaps you can start with your comments and then we'll move to Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. So I have reviewed the letter and the deputies have as well. Excuse me. First off, let me just say that we're taking these issues, these conversations very seriously, and they're a priority for the administration of this police service. We were present at the protest rally a few weeks ago, not only in our capacity, in our professional capacity, but as citizens and as human beings. And we know that may have been a singular event, but we know that the conversations and issues persist. So action is required, and we are fully committed to, Chair, you spoke of concrete action. It's easy to give lip service to issues and talk about grand plans one may have, but we've had discussions and continue those discussions as to what concrete action it looks like from our perspective. And we could share more of that later. But I want the public to know that we heard you, we listened, and we did hear you. And we recognize there are problems in policing, the culture of policing. There is bias in policing, there is police brutality. There are people who feel discriminated against and treated differently because of their backgrounds and other factors. So maybe, as a police service, and as a profession, we do need to reflect, but maybe in the past we've done too much talking, telling people what to do, what not to do, being so enforcement oriented. Maybe it's time that we do listen a bit more. And that's what this will include for us, is listening more and determining what people's needs are and how we can destigmatize policing and address problems within our own ranks and move forward constructively in partnership with the board and other community partners. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I actually have a question for you as the chair. I think it would be helpful for everyone if you were actually outline what the recommendations are. So sort of talked about them and said there's a whole bunch of them in these areas, but I wonder if you could just speak to them, because people who may not have received the letter directly, I think it's helpful to just draw attention to what those are. I know there's quite a few, but if you wouldn't mind.
Of course, I'd be happy to speak to the specific recommendations. I would then again ask that the chair be taken to the vice chair, because these are recommendations from me and not on behalf of the board.
Of course. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Just give me a moment as I bring up the document. All right, so I'll share with the community that I've outlined suggestions in 6 specific areas. And the first area relates to the funding of police. I've spoken to the fact that we've already scrutinized and adjudicated the policing budget and recognized that the calls for service have not decreased and that there's very little room for reallocation. But I am specifically recommending that the board direct Chief Williams to seek where cost savings are possible and report on the impact of any such savings to the board, as well as provide information to council as to recommendations on where any possible funds may or could be reinvested. The other topic of mental health response speaks to concerns we've heard from the community in regards to areas for improvement. This is a topic we've already tackled as a board. I'm specifically recommending 3 things. Number 1, that we direct the chief to report back on mental health calls and trends within London Police Service, that we collectively advocate through unity for more sustainable funding for community police partnerships in mental health. And I'm also advocating that we propose a cross-sectoral roundtable on anti-racism and mental health crisis response to inform further action within our jurisdiction. The other item that's come to our table as an issue of feedback relates to school resource officers. There have been several members of our community that have expressed concern. This is an area where there's really more need for engagement and information. There have been concerns that have been brought forward by certain members of our community that we should be leaning into. And so my recommendation is that we have further consultation with the school boards in our community and with racialized lenders on the topic of school resource officers. The next topic relates to anti-racism and bias in policing. Given that we know systemic racism is a systemic issue and will not be addressed through one meeting or one motion, I'm suggesting that we affirm the board's commitment to addressing racism and bias within our community, that we request that our chief report back on suggestions on how to embed anti-racism initiatives into our existing business plan, and that we as a board reallocate our board's travel budget towards training and engagements for this year related to addressing anti-Black racism. The next area relates to policing culture, and in consideration of the fact that policing is a heavily scrutinized and regulated profession, and the fact that there are multiple systems and independent oversight bodies that often fall out of our jurisdiction, I would like to request that the chief report back on proposed internal reforms regarding transparency, discipline, and improving culture and climate. Last but not least, on the topic of data and transparency, I'm suggesting that we engage with the community and London Police Services on co-designing in partnership a race-based data collection, analysis, and reporting policy for the board, and that we suggest that our chief consider working towards race-based data collection, analysis, and reporting in a strategy that would complement any existing policy. Thank you for the opportunity to share my specific recommendations. So the chair remains in Vice Chair Toth's hands.
Would you like to take your chair role back?
Sure, if you'd like to give it back to me, I'll take it.
I will give it back to you gladly.
Thank you. Okay, Vice Chair Toth.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I want to thank the Chair for his very thoughtful and comprehensive letter with those recommendations. I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank everyone in London for all their letters. We received hundreds, their passion, their commitment to justice and to anti-Black racism. The pain and the grief is palpable and it's moving, as are the calls for reform. I grieve with you and I hear those calls. I also want to, along with the Chief and Chair, acknowledge unequivocally that anti-Black racism exists and that racism against Indigenous people and people of color exists as well. There can't be any discussion or argument about that. As a woman of color, I've experienced this personally and firsthand. I am acutely aware that currently affordable housing and mental health and addiction services and youth services and services for Indigenous people are severely underfunded and have been for decades. These are services that by their nature are going to stop the flow of calls downstream to police where they should not lie. The province has to do better. Yes, the municipality has to do better and all of us need to do better, but the province has to do better. This has to happen now. This change has to be systemic. It needs to be taken seriously. What's become really clear to me is that we cannot be afraid of seizing this opportunity, of using that to motivate us into change and innovation, and not be afraid of demanding funding for those very services that are going to decrease that need for police intervention. And it has to happen internally as well. And I think that the chair was very articulate and the police chief has been very clear that we recognize that. But it has to happen across sectors. And it has to be thoughtful and deliberate, sure, but it has to actually happen. I've heard from police that they recognize that they shouldn't be social workers. They shouldn't be in the position of being in that first line. Absolutely, there are supportive roles that they have to play, especially where safety is an issue, but they're not social workers and they're not supposed to be. So we can't be afraid of looking inward, of being better and engaging in that analysis and in the training that we need to do. Look at how we provide services, look at what we're doing currently. Is it the best way we can be doing things? And I am confident, for what it's worth, that the board and the administration and the association are up to this challenge. There's been conversations happening internally, externally, and that gives me some of that confidence. I know that there's a will, I know that there's a way, and part of me thinks this moment in time is that incredible opportunity that we should and that we will be embracing. And I just want to mention that I'm also very aware that any given time, crime is still happening in our community. We just saw a report where the average time for a call for service is over 2 hours. People are waiting for hours for police services. There's still calls for community policing downtown. People want to see that presence as well. I know that that might not be a popular opinion right now, but that's certainly something that in previous meetings we've spoken about. And I also want to remind everybody that the mental health of our officers continues to be a significant concern, and that's tied to adequate staffing. And finally, a reminder that our board role is one of governance, not operational. But I think we can do better. right now. We're going to have those discussions. I fully support the calls to action that the chair has laid out. I think they're really important. They're very meaningful. There's action oriented. There's still important calls for consultation on issues like the school resource officers that need to have, and it seems to certainly mirror what I'm seeing from the school board as well, this need to engage the community on those issues. And I'm prepared to move and support those action items. And I have a couple of specific ideas that we can get into a little later, but certainly I think this is a really excellent start. And I hope people understand that this is really the result of all of your combined voices.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is there a seconder for the Vice Chair's motion? Mayor? Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm happy to see this go forward, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for this very thoughtful and detailed letter and approach. I would ask if the mover and seconder would be amenable to an amendment to the action item regarding school resource officers. It's not necessarily changing the spirit of it. I just would like to take it down another level and a little bit more detail. And I would say that the consultation must involve students, and especially students from Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities. It should include all economic students from all economic classes. And it should also involve the Indigenous communities, both outside of London and within London, as well as Black and racialized communities and parents, as well as school board officials.
Thank you, Councillor. Is the Vice Chair and Mayor comfortable with that amendment? I see confirmation from the Vice Chair. Mayor, are you comfortable with the amendment language suggested by Councillor Cassidy? I see an affirmative there. Thank you. So we'll move forward with discussion.
Actually, Chair, just it would have been helpful to have that in more granular detail. So I will accept the spirit of it, but I think when amendments like these come forward, it would be helpful to see them in specific, so that we know what it is that we are more broadly agreeing to. Certainly, particularly when it comes to the kind of granular detail that the councillor is speaking in terms of. But the spirit of it, I understand. That's why I'm prepared to work with the Vice Chair on this as well. But just as a thought for future reference, it would be more helpful, I think.
Thank you. We can work to improve that as that aspect of our process as a board, definitely. Perhaps what I will do, though, is just ask Councillor Cassidy to once again speak specifically to the language that she'd like included, just to repeat it again for clarity and ensure that everybody's aware of the specifics.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That the consultation should include students, and especially students from Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities, as well as students from all economic backgrounds. It should include the Indigenous communities, both within London and outside, and as well as Black and racialized communities. And it should also include parents, as well as school boards, which you already had included school boards. I just wanted some more very specific details on the racialized Londoners that you had included in your initial direction.
Thank you. Additional comments, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. I wanted to talk about the first item that you addressed in your letter, Chair, which is around the police funding. And I'm sure all colleagues are aware that headed to Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee next week is a report about the assessment growth funding. And as you'll see there, given the fiscal situation of the city, a lot of the assessment growth funding requests are not going ahead. So, a lot of people are getting half of what has been asked for. Not all of these things can be accommodated. And there's obviously implications for police. So I wonder if the chief or perhaps the deputy chief wants to address the assessment growth funding and where we sort of stand right now, partway through the year. We're coming up on the end of June, and nothing has happened yet on the assessment growth funding, and it looks like at most half is going to be allocated.
Chief Williams.
Thank you. So the 10 growth positions that were approved by the board in the fall or earlier this year, I can't remember. Those needs were articulated in business cases, and quite frankly, they remain. They're required to keep up with workload. We've already heard that the calls for service remain high to unacceptable levels. We've received a number of complaints last year to the province about our service delivery, specific about our response times. And the wellness and burnout of our officers has been well covered and remains, particularly, obviously, the front line, but particularly in the comm center. So those needs remain. We're always looking for ways to mitigate them through other solutions. And in the short term, fortunately, or I guess unfortunately, the COVID situation has impacted our calls for service and where they dropped temporarily. But they are back in full swing, and we're back up almost where we were before. So, again, last year we had 4,000 occasions where officers on the front line didn't get any breaks, didn't get lunch during their shift. So when you're working 10, 11, 12-hour shifts, literally call to call, high stress calls, for 4, 5, 6 days in a row, that adds up. And 33,000 hours in overtime, that takes its toll and is cumulative. And we see it in a very, very real ways. So, we need to continue to pursue solutions, which in this case is staffing, to mitigate those risks to our members and keep up with the service delivery that the public expect. I fully appreciate the situation the city's in completely. And unfortunately, with the COVID situation, unfortunately, it doesn't change the needs for our organization. But we're happy to defer some of those, as you alluded to, until just later in the year or early next year. Not happy to, but agreeable.
Deputy Mayor. Okay.
There we go. It was muted. I was trying to get it unmuted. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we're good.
Okay, so I wanted to follow up on that. I appreciate the comments, and obviously the fiscal situation that the city and the service, by implication, are in because of COVID. Nobody wants that, and I'm sure we all wish it was different, but that's the situation we're in. So I want to understand what the implications are of having 5 positions instead of 10. We're already halfway through the year, and we haven't hired any of those positions. So I just want to make sure I understand. It sounds like you said you're not happy about it, but it's sort of manageable. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's been manageable because primarily because of COVID. So we had some short-term changes in our service.
One admin UD.
Doing things over the telephone, which was good temporarily, but couldn't be sustained. So I mean, the impacts are yet to be seen because we're just coming out of this pandemic, hopefully. But we're also going into the summer, so this is when our members are going to be taking vacations, and regular operations will resume well. So the risks are going to be continued burnout of officers, continued complaints about our calls for service, and it would put us back in the same boat we were last year. There is a tolerance level, which I think I'm comfortable with in deferring some of those positions to January, because we're already halfway through the year. But it's not sustainable.
Yeah. So I want to ask a bit more of a specific question. That's helpful. So right now, it looks like if the report that's gone to SPPC goes through as it is, be 5 positions instead of 10. What if it was 2 positions, just the communications operators, and not and essentially delay the other 3 as well? Because I think we really have to look at the overall situation and how we're allocating resources. I'm sure it has been helpful to have some of the school resource officers freed up, when the schools are all closed unexpectedly. All of a sudden, you've got people who can do other things. And in some ways, that would be helpful. It probably has provided some relief in places where otherwise it would have been really, really tight. But as you say, that doesn't necessarily continue, all the time, and the summer is very different for folks. So I just want to get a sense if the other 3 were not to go ahead until later, what the impact of that would be.
Yeah, so I wasn't picking up what you were trying to say before completely, obviously. So the 2 comms operators are desperate is probably a fair term, and we'd like to proceed with those. The 3 uniform officers, you make a very good point. We are able to defer those until January, but I don't want to take them off the table. I just like to defer, or I'm comfortable deferring them.
So if the mover and the seconder are comfortable, I'd like to suggest that we essentially make that recommendation to the city and say, right now there were 10 originally in the request, that we're okay with deferring 3 more of those positions, and that we suggest they allocate those resources on a one-time basis to support some of the other things that they're not going ahead with, like just down underneath the policing assessment growth allocation business cases, homeless prevention, housing allowance. And half of those are going ahead and the other half are not. And, I think, you look at the kind of priorities we got in the community, the kind of things that are leading to a lot of calls for service is, there's a lot of people who are really battling a lot of difficult situations and are living unsheltered in the community. Those housing allowances are just one example of something that can actually help people stay in housing instead of living on the street. And, it's not like a long-term solution, but it's a short-term thing that could be done that I think actually helps not just the folks who are now into housing with support, but also the police service and the kind of calls that we're going to be getting. So, I think that is a reasonable idea to defer an additional 3 positions to go ahead with the communications operators, because I hear the chief that is, desperately needed and can't wait. And I think if we can wait, we should on some of these other things, partly for the financial reasons, the city that the city is in, but also to indicate that we see the value in some of these other things that can happen now in the middle of the pandemic that might be, frankly, more urgent than the things that we have to deal with just within policing. So I would suggest that as an amendment if people are comfortable with that.
Right, so you're suggesting an amendment. So the question is whether to amend the existing motion made by Vice Chair Toth and seconded by the mayor, or to take and formulate what you've shared into a separate motion. Mayor, did you have a thought there?
I'm certainly comfortable incorporating that into the original motion.
Vice Chair? Okay, I think we just have to be careful around the language in terms of what is and what isn't within our jurisdiction. So could you, Deputy Mayor, just repeat the language that you're recommending for the amendment?
I think to communicate to civic administration that we can defer an additional 3 positions until 2021. We can go without the assessment growth for 2020. And that we would suggest that those funds be allocated to a high priority item like homelessness prevention on a one-time basis.
Okay. So the amendment is to communicate that we can accept deferral of 3 assessment growth positions and suggest that funds be reallocated to items such as homelessness prevention.
Yep.
Okay. Any further comments on the now amended motion? Chief Williams.
Just for clarity, are we deferring 8 then? 8 in total. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from administration or board members on the motion? Questions, clarifications? If not, yeah, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment briefly. I want to emphasize that I think that this is a good first step. But I think the chair mentioned this in his earlier remarks, and the chief picked up on it as well and emphasized it, is that this is like a ongoing process. It's not going to be all solved in one meeting. And I expect that we're going to be working through these issues for quite some time. And I think the approach that the chair has taken is a good one, to try and have a thoughtful, considered approach. I think the chief and the administration are approaching it with the right kind of attitude, which is to acknowledge where there are issues, be open to changing things to make things better. Because I think at the high level of objectives within the community, a lot of people have the same things in mind, right? They want to live in a safe community where they can go about their life and enjoy themselves and not be in fear of anything. People have a very strong degree of overlap in terms of what they want to achieve, and how we get there is where you get some disagreements. And I think it's going to take a lot from people in positions of authority to change things. It's not going to be easy. It's going to require a lot of discussions like we've had today. And I do think this is a good first step towards a better future. So I'm happy to support this motion.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll call it to a question. All in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Cassidy, did you have a comment there? Okay, go ahead. Sorry, it's just the pace of the visual with the virtual meeting format.
Sorry. Yeah, I just want to thank you again for putting this. Thanks to the chief and the deputy chiefs as well for having this kind of conversation with us. For participating in the march and in the gathering for Black Lives Matter. It's a community conversation, and it's not an. Although, racism and the systemic racism that exists is an us against them, feels like an us against them to people that are victims of this. It's the way we're going to get through this as a board and as a police service is to not take that stance, to not take sides, to not participate in an us against them kind of conversation. It has to be all of us together. And acknowledging the existence of systemic racism, and not just systemic in the police service or any particular organization, but systemic across the board in all our systems and in society as a whole. And this is a good first step. I know that people are looking for really substantial change. I know this is a first step, and I know we have to go a lot further. I'm fearful of going too slowly and taking too many really small steps when people want a great big giant leap. I do think we do need to do it in a thoughtful way and in an effective way. So I'm very happy to support this, and as others have said, I'm going to be looking for more, and not just from this board and not just from the London Police Service, but from London and the whole of society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments? Vice Chair?
Sorry, I just feel compelled to thank Councillor Cassidy for those comments. I think that's really critical, and maybe a tiny little piece that perhaps we had missed up till now. This question of addressing systemic racism internally and externally, and being aware that people have been waiting a very long time. So thank you very much, Councillor. I think that was very important.
Thank you. Any further comments? All right, we'll call the motion to question. All in favor? So we'll consider it carried. Thank you very much. We move on. We have a few more items on our agenda to cover. The next item is actually part of what we're adding to new business. It refers to the COVID-19 status sharing policy that was discussed and deliberated on at our last meeting. We had agreed as a board to go back and fine tune some of the language in the policy. We want to share with the public that that policy that the board eventually approved has been posted publicly and it is in the public domain. We also want to share, as was supported by the board previously, is we're suggesting that we approve and send a letter to the ministers and premier related to some of our concerns pertaining to the status sharing policy. In particular, the letter proposed speaks to concerns about the members of our community that have been disproportionately impacted by this order in a negative way. For example, individuals who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, as well as people who are sex workers. We know as a board that these communities have longstanding mistrust within both health and policing sectors. We are concerned as a board that fear of disclosure could limit help seeking for these individuals from these communities if they suspect they may have symptoms of COVID-19. So with that, I'll just open it up to see if there's any comments or questions about the letter and ask for a motion to approve. Do I have a motion? Moved by Councillor Cassie, seconded by Mr. Lang. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll ask for a vote on the motion. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. I believe that Vice Chair Toth just had one more item that she wished to add to the new business.
Thank you, Chair. I think there was just a little bit of confusion around the towing issue about whether or not there was an actual motion. So I just thought if we could take this opportunity to clarify that there were two motions that were passed in camera. Chair, I don't know if you want to take us through those, or I'm happy to do that as well.
I can defer to you on the specifics of the two motions that were passed. Please go ahead.
So just for clarity, the motions were passed in camera just because there was some legal advice surrounding them. But the first motion was with respect to extending that contract for another year with Ross Towing. So that was voted on. And the second was a motion to write a letter to the city requesting that the regulation of the towing industry in the city of London occur in a timely manner as well. So just so for clarity, two motions, those are both passed.
Thank you, Vice Chair, for the clarification for members of the public and for the board. Are there any other items that members of the board wish to bring forward or discuss today? All right. Well, as we get close to the moment of adjournment, I just wanted to express my gratitude to everybody. We are continuing this virtual meeting format with the desire to return in person as soon as public health guidelines and safety considerations allow. I will be available for any media requests subsequent to the adjournment of the meeting. On behalf of the board, please contact us if any of those such requests would like to be made. With that stated, I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Vice Chair. Seconded by Councillor Cassidy. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone. Wish everybody the best. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a good weekend. Bye.